This event is part of our Story Futures autumn season, and we had one event previously featuring some great immersive technology with our Chinese partners. This event is focused on what you need to know working with China in this sector, and we'll have another event coming up early in the new year regarding our funding announcement. But I'll hand over to James Bennett to give you all the details.
Thanks, Carly. And thanks for joining us, everybody out there in Zoom land. My job is to, in a few minutes, kind of give a quick overview of what Story Futures China is and what we're hoping to achieve today. Story Futures China is part of the Story Futures project, which is funded through a combination of the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the UK government's Industrial Challenge Strategy funding. We're part of two kind of cohorts linked together. A cohort called the Creative Industries Clusters Programme, which is designed to accelerate creative industries growth in the UK by linking creative industries with ring-fenced R&D funding and ring-fenced R&D research from universities across the UK. Story Futures aims to support companies growing and innovating with immersive technologies through developing compelling new forms of immersive experiences using virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and the kind of wider spectrum of immersive technologies and experiences. And so our aim really is to help companies experiment in these areas and grow, but do so in a way that puts these experiences into the hands of audiences around the globe. And that is how we've also managed to launch Story Futures China, which is funded again by the Arts and Humanities Research Council as part of a cohort of 8 projects spread across the UK that are designed to help the UK creative industries and cultural institutions form a bridge with the Chinese market and vice versa as part of post-Brexit thinking of what markets will open up or do we need to open up as an economy to help our creative industries flourish. So Story Futures China has a couple of really specific aims that the seminar today hopes to build towards. Firstly, we're aiming to help kind of create a roadmap and framework for how Chinese and UK collaborations in immersive technologies can operate. We're specifically focused around the area of cultural institutions because of the second aim of our program is that we will actually, as part of this, create and fund 2 immersive prototype experiences, one housed at the National Gallery in London in the UK, and a counterpart experience housed at the Shanghai Science and Technology Museum in Shanghai, as you might expect. These 2 experiences will be built during 2021 and go live in 2022. There's an approximate budget of around £150,000 for the UK experience and equivalent for the Chinese experience. We'll be working over the next few months to finalise what the creative brief of these experiences will be with both the National Gallery and the Shanghai Science and Technology Museum. But we've been working with both of those partners and those with a great deal of experience in working in China to map out some of the framework and ways of working with Chinese partners and vice versa that this project and any company involved in working with China will need to think through. So today, what our aim is to share some of that knowledge and learnings about how the Chinese market around cultural institutions' use of immersive technologies work. Wrap that within a framework of how the Department of International Trade and experiences from PACT, the Producers Alliance of Cinema and Television, can tell us about what some of the challenges and opportunities of working with China are in terms of intellectual property, in terms of international trade agreements, in terms of co-production and co-collaboration. So our aim is to share that knowledge and experience with you across 2 presentations. One from our research team led by Dr. Mariana Rolbina, who's working on the business modeling side, Dr. Lulu Yin, who's working on design innovation and audience, Dr. Lisa Lin, who's working on the production management side, and Junan Li, who's working on how the innovation policies of the Chinese government inform where and how money is spent within the sector. Between them, they've conducted over 30 interviews with companies and stakeholders involved in working in China and working in exporting into China to set out what a journey might look like if you're interested in working into that market. And they're going to do so, as Carly says, in an interactive fashion, that if you can go to the poll everywhere address in the chat would be really welcome. And then Dawn McCarthy from PACT is going to give us some insights from previous experience of working in television and film across the seas with China. We'll then have a Q&A where we're joined by Department of International Trade, Tony Humphrey, who's a screen specialist and expert in Chinese relations, lots of experience there, where we'll pick up on any questions that you put into the chat and hope that you enjoy the time that we've got together over Zoom this lunchtime. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mariana Robina for the first part of our presentations.
Hello. Hi, yes, I've been unmuted. Thank you very much, James. Now I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my presentation? Yeah. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to open this session. So, as James mentioned, we're going to present to you some of the aspects of exporting your immersive cultural experience to museums and galleries in China. So my name is Mariana Rolbina. I'm a research fellow with Story Futures, and this session will be conducted by myself and my colleagues Lulu, Shinan, and Lisa. And us having over a decade among us of research and teaching experience and all being academics, we can make this session as boring as you like. But today we decided to go for something slightly different. So we're going to take you on a journey. This journey will take you from not sureship all the way to confidence castle. So we're starting at not sureship, where you might be not so sure about what it takes to export your creative experiences, and all the way to the confidence castle, where hopefully we will all end up by the end of this session, where you know exactly what it takes to take your immersive creative experiences all the way to China. Now, it's very tempting to just go from one end to another, just in a straight line. But if you do that, avoiding all the kind of nuances, you risk being lost in the forest of small but important export-related issues and being stranded in the mountains. Obviously, we don't want that. Now, to guide you through this journey, we conducted, as James mentioned, a number of interviews. So the journey that you're about to go through is actually based on other people's experiences and not just theory. So in order to follow us on this journey, please go to this website, polab.com/China, and to your name. And this is the picture that you should be seeing. So don't worry about like your name. The results are anonymous, and we will delete the responses after the session. If you have trouble joining this website on your phone, shout in the chat and one of our hosts will help you out. Now, hopefully like everyone's joining. So a couple of shout outs in the chat if you're there. A bit quiet. So is everyone there then? Okay, yes, getting a couple of yeses. Great. Great, thank you. Yeah, okay. So most people are there, so let's start with our journey. Now, as you step from the not sure ship to the ground, the first place you end up is business bog, where I will be your guide. Now, bogs are dangerous places, and it's always better to traverse them with a trusted partner. The same can be said about export business. So my first question to you is, what local partner in China has the longest commissioning and production cycle? Now, on your phone, you should have a poll that comes up, and you can answer it. Okay, we're getting some answers. State-owned theme park. Okay. Interesting. So, right. A lot of activity. It's very interesting. People have very different opinions. Right. So the majority seems to agree that it's a state-owned cultural institution, and this is usually the correct answer. So yes, usually commissioning cycles and production cycles in state-owned cultural institutions in China takes longer than with other partners. Now, to be clear, all of these companies can be potential clients for your immersive cultural experiences because they all host such experiences, even the shopping malls and entertainment parks. However, there are some differences between commercial and state-owned companies, so I will briefly cover those. So the state-owned cultural institutions, those are the big well-known museums that you usually think about when thinking about Chinese museum sector, so such as Palace Museum, Shanghai Museum of Science and Technology, massive institutions with a huge audience reach, active market. The reason that they have rather long commissioning cycles is because the nature in which they get their financing. They receive the money from the government, and if they want to do something extra, such as commission a new immersive experience, they need to apply for financing, which they will get for the next financial year, which in China is the same as calendar year. So if you approach them, say, in July, they might not be able to commit to a new production until the next year. So they are quite difficult to get hold of. As Lisa will tell you later, they're not allowed to directly commission from foreign companies. So they're much easier to approach through international collaboration schemes, such as Story Futures China, than doing it on your own. The commercial clients, on the other hand, represent a wide variety of companies, all the way from like retail and property developers to privately owned high art galleries. Being privately owned, they command relatively bigger budgets and are more free to allocate them. However, sometimes the decision to commission something from a foreign company can also take quite a bit of time. But when the decision is made, the production cycle is usually very, very fast. So one of the companies we talked to shared that the work that they usually do across half a year in UK, their Chinese partners expected the same work to be done in 2 months. Now, the reasons behind this is first, the quality expectations are not always as high as they are in UK or US. And second, these clients, because they need to generate profit, they prefer buying experiences that have already been proven a success somewhere else rather than commissioning something to be done from scratch. So when you approach them, it's always useful to have an example of your work to showcase, to prove that you can provide a valuable product to them. So now that you hopefully decide on what partner you're looking for, let's discuss what you yourself will be doing. So my next question is, what is the best business model for you to enter the Chinese market? Again, please go to your phone on the poll and let me know what you think. Representative office, yes, quite a popular thing to do. Joint venture, yes, that used to be actually the most popular way for foreign companies to enter the Chinese market. Okay, a lot of people are going with joint ventures. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Okay, so none of the above. That's probably people who want to just fly in, which is great for kind of light touch when the travel is allowed. Fewer people going with wholly owned, which used to be quite difficult to run, but actually they've been made easier to open and close in the recent years. Okay, so quite an uneven split, but people seem to prefer joint ventures and representative offices. So now the business bog can be tricky, and this was actually a trick question. So there isn't a right or wrong answer here. It all depends on what you are aiming to do, and all the different business models here, they have their different pros and cons. Now, joint ventures used to be the most popular. However, they require a reliable partner, which is not always easy to find. And that reliance on the partner obviously exposes a foreign company to more risks. Now, they're good for entering supply chains. But again, recently, the wholly owned foreign enterprises have been made easier to establish, and they have the benefit of not requiring a partner and providing the full market presence with the ability to produce, to market your experiences in China. Now, whichever model you choose, one thing that a number of our interviewees pointed out is that the biggest issue is kind of getting money in and out of China due to the difference in the money transfer systems and in regulation. It's quite a difficult thing to do, and something that needs to be figured out before you go, before you kind of start operating whichever model you choose. Now, representative office and flying in when it's possible are good ways to kind of test the waters, to see if you can get any business in China before you fully commit to it. So now that you hopefully decided on the most suitable business model for yourself, you're almost out of the business bog. Now, the last question here is slightly tricky, and I want you to tell me how are you going to protect your IP. So on your phones, it's an open-ended question. Just please type the answer of what you think you need to do to protect your IP when going to China. Okay. Do it in the UK and pray. Oh, yes, that's very heartening replies. Okay, not sure. Wow, so good relationship with a partner to protect together. Yes, that's a great idea. Lots of responses. Employing an IP lawyer to help, consulting Chinese IP lawyer. Yes, these are great advice. And actually, DIT has a whole list of lawyers who work with UK companies to protect IP. Co-production, so kind of relying on the partner, again, very sound advice, because Chinese partners have the advantage of knowing the market better and knowing the legal system better. Okay, NDA, so okay, turnkey project from concept to delivery. Yeah, these are all great ideas. Now, I just wanted to cover some kind of more general do's and don'ts of IP registration in China. Now, a number of people we spoke with noticed that IP situation in China is improving, but still it has a way to go. So whenever you're exporting something, it's worth exporting something that contains know-how. So even if your digital assets or your art style, some kind of more surface elements get copied, something that creates know-how means that whoever copies you will not be able to create as valuable experience as you can, because they can't do some sort of maybe production process as efficiently as you, or they don't have any underlying knowledge about how to run it. So always kind of aim to export something that contains know-how. Now, the translation and registering your brand seems like a very easy thing to do and kind of very straightforward. But what's important, in particular in Chinese market, is that you shouldn't wait until the market entry, so kind of until the last moment to do that. Now, Chinese IP registration works on a first come, first served basis. So whoever registers the trademark first gets the right. And actually, one company who wanted to produce in China, they had everything set up, and the last thing they did was to register their brand. And when they went to register it, actually they found out that somebody already applied for the trademark that they owned, and they had to delay their market entry for 2 years because they had to prove that they were the rightful owner of this brand. So it is quite a tricky thing, and you should not delay registering as soon as you decide to kind of get into Chinese market. Now, relying on your partner to protect your IP is fine, but don't expect it to happen on its own. So you need to formalize the responsibilities very explicitly in the contracts that you sign, and kind of get their help to protect your IP. That being said, fighting infringement on your own might also not be the best idea, because first of all, it might be quite a time-consuming and costly process. And secondly, Chinese legal system is different from UK system. So getting expert advice and help is always advisable. So read up on the regulation, talk to sport organizations such as DIT or CBBC or PACT, who can provide you the advice of how to protect your IP better. Now, with that said, you are out of the business bog, and I leave you with Lulu, who will guide you through market meadows.
Hello everyone, hi, I'm Lulu. So come with me to explore the market meadows. So let's first think about, now you may have learned about how to establishing a collaboration with Chinese institutions, and you shall have a deep understanding of Chinese museums and audiences before developing your own ideas. So firstly, we can look at the number of Chinese museums. So according to the latest government report, China has built almost 4,918 museums until 2018. And we can see a significant growth in the number in the last decade, that more than 3,000 museums were developed. So why there are so many museums in China? Because Chinese government has issued documentations to encourage the enthusiasm of the museum industry. And Xunnan will introduce more about this section. And also the rise of the knowledge economy and the public's desire to pursue science, art, and aesthetics has become stronger. So therefore, the museum as a social education institution has the responsibility of disseminating knowledge to the whole society. So that's why a large number of museums are being built all over China. So moving our journey to the types of the museums. In China, museums are classified into history museums, art museums, also means galleries, science and technology museums, and integrated museums, which have more diverse contents. And among them, the majority is the integrated museums and the history museums, which accounted for 36% and 35% of the total in 2019, while the Museum of Science and Technology only had 4% the same year. So since China has many museums, later on, if we go on, here I have a question to you. How many visitors have all Chinese museums got in 2018? So if you look at your phone, you may find the interactive section there. I can say most people choose 800 million and some people choose 1 billion. Wow, impressive. And and there's more answers coming, and some people feel 200 million or 500 million. Okay, great. So So let's find out the right answer in the latest government report. So it indicates that museums in China received more than 1,044 million and also more than 1 billion visitors in 2018. And from 2015 to 2018, the number of visitors has increased by about 100 million each year. So the rise of visitors is caused by various factors, including the climbing museums and the populations, the knowledge economy, and the income and the education of Chinese people. So if we continue, we can have a close look at museum visitors. So according to an online survey done by a Chinese research center in 2018, more males than females were found in the museum visitors, and the people aged from 18 to 40 accounted for the largest proportion of the total visitors, which is 88.65%. So, however, yeah, if we moving on, we will see that the data of audiences is changing when talking about a specific museum. For example, the Shanghai Science and Technology Museum had almost half of their 2018 visitors be younger than 18. So owing to the large number of younger audiences, domestic museums in China has used the power of new technology and the new media to innovate exhibition activities to achieve younger communication. So what is new media or technology? I will tell you in the following sections. But before that, I have another question to you. Yeah, here, I want to ask you, for what reason do you think Chinese people go to the museum? So if you look at your phone, yeah, you may find the answers and options there. Great. So to learn something. Yeah, we all agree the museum is a great place to get new knowledges. And yeah, to go with friends. Yeah, it's quite important because Chinese people usually don't go to the museum alone. They usually go there with friends or families. And some people choose motivated by the TV show or brought by the agency, travel agency. Yeah, cool. Yeah, actually, they are all significant reasons, and we can find out more. Yeah, here, if we see in the chart, we can see a general drive for people to visit the museum is the hobby or the purpose to study something. And many people also think the museum is a great place to hang out with friends, and you are right in this part. And many tourists are brought to the museum by the travel agency. And also an interesting fact is that audiences are motivated a lot by literature and TV shows. Since TV shows such as The National Treasures and The New Arrivals in the Forbidden City have been broadcast in China, museums have entered the public eye in an easy to understand manner and have become more attractive. And if we go on, do you remember that I told you Chinese museums use new media and technology to achieve younger communication? Well, they are mainly digital approaches. So let's dig out more details about them. So if we go, we can see for on-site exhibitions, Chinese museums usually use projectors or screens to show a computer restoration of a historical site, a relic, or a story. And the museum also communicates information in interactions through touch screens and motion-based activities. And to further immerse audiences, they combine physical prototypes and the digital content to simulate real-world experiences which are not easy to access in daily life. And they also use VR or MR to fully involve audiences in a virtual environment. And the AR content and the AI robots can be found to diversify the interactive activities. But what about off-site audiences? Yeah, nowadays in China, online museums are the most comprehensive platforms for people to remotely appreciate museum collections, which are digitalized in high-resolution images. And the online museum also provides visual audio materials to tell stories of the collections. In addition, it uses 360 videos and animations to deliver virtual exhibitions, and uses games to communicate knowledge in an entertaining way. And sometimes Chinese museums create interactive platforms such as H5 page on smartphone to make the remote access easier. So after we learned about Chinese museums and audiences, I would like you to think about Yeah, if we go on, I would like you to think about what you can do to engage Chinese audiences in immersive and interactive exhibitions. Yeah, I know many of you may have not done any projects or designed anything for Chinese people, but based on your experience in creating immersive content, you may have some idea. You could have a quick brainstorming, yeah. But also when you have the brainstorming, also think about what kind of design is suitable to Chinese people and the market. Give them response, yeah. Personalization of experience, I like this. Not use VR, yeah, that's quite important. Make it fun always, yeah, because the museum want to attract children and families with children, so it's quite important to make it fun. Yeah, reuse old building. Yeah, it's very important to combine the architecture as well as the exhibition content. Yeah, mobile phone. Yeah, it's quite, as I said, it's quite easy for people to access some information and virtual content. Tell non-Chinese stories. If it's non-Chinese stories, it should also have some connecting part to make people easy to understand the story. Well-known objects, yeah, of course, no matter is word well-known or Chinese well-known objects is quite important, because if the content or the interaction is familiar to Chinese people, to Chinese people's daily life, it's easier to make them to accept the immersive content. Celebrities. Yeah, for the celebrities, yeah, I will explain this part later on. So let's see what Chinese institutions have done in this section, okay? So some Chinese museums create a simple game appended to an exhibition to arouse people's interest and the curiosity of the onset visit. And for example, the Shanghai Science and Technology Museum, they usually create some games, and the new game they create is a game of whales, and the game just simply introduce different whales in the river and ocean, but people have to explore more in the museum, of course. So those games usually published on WeChat, so which is a smartphone app used by almost all Chinese people every day. So here I want to remind you that if you want to enter Chinese market, you shall download WeChat as the first thing to do. So, okay, if we continue. Sorry, Marina, still stay in the last page. Yeah. We can also say Chinese institutions also cooperate with internet celebrities in promoting exhibitions to the public. And for on-site visitors, a logical story with simple interactions and entertaining factors makes the immersive experience more acceptable, reasonable, and engaging, rather than only using fascinating technologies. And the multiplayer mode, which enables many people to interact with the content together, is time-saving and makes audiences more willing to engage. And finally, smartphone apps can continue and expand the on-site experience off-site. So we can see that Chinese institutions adopt various means to engage the public audience. But in fact, what they are doing is objective-centered rather than visitor-centered. So Chinese museums or institutions barely do user research or get feedback from audiences. So if you want to fit in Chinese immersive market, you shall not only bring innovative ideas, but also help the museum to value the user-centered studies and improve the audience engagement. So that is what we have explored so far. So you will continue the adventure with Xunnan. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Xunnan Li. I'm a researcher from Royal Holloway University of London in Story Future China. And here we come to the policy peaks. I will be your guide for the next stage of journey. Yet, In this journey, we will learn about China's innovation policy and what will provide some useful context for the projects and also for the UK companies to understand China better. So it is somehow difficult to define what it is innovation that is very closely related to the context and individuals. So here you already voted for the questions. Yep. And both the high technology, new products and business models, they're very interesting. They're all related to innovation. So let's move on to the journey, please. Yep. So another question you might think about technology improvements. So could you also let me know what do you think about China will think of innovation? Yeah, novel concept. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, innovation is always about something new. So it will be new products. Yeah, some answers that we already got before, and valuable. Yeah. Some innovation will be very valuable economically and socially, and crucially important. That very good. Leading tax. Yeah. Co-produce is very important things. New experiences. Yeah, exploitation is very important. Yep, they are all very important things. So you have already had some ideas about technology and improvements, new products and systematic development, and so on. So let's moving on our journey. So they are all related to innovation as long as your answers are consistent with the context of innovation you think about. So innovation is quite varies context. So another question is, what does China think about innovation? So policy is where a state and government thoughts and ideology can be reflected. So to get better understanding of China's innovation policy will benefit our understanding of innovations in China. So let's moving on our journey. Yep. The Chinese central government launches every 5 years a planning policy for the following 5 years, which is called 5-year plan. The tradition can be dated back to the establishment of PRC in 1949. The central government plan to do also directs to all levels of lower authorities and the use of money and introduction of new projects. Yep, so through looking at the 3 5-year plans covering the 15 years from 2010 to 2025, we will be able to review China's innovating development and understanding what China is doing for innovating, also predicate what direction China will go for. So from 2010 to 2014, China was conducting its 12th 5-year plan. It is aimed at encouraging innovation-oriented business and institutions to construct a basis for innovation-oriented industries. According to this, by 2014, China's GDP has been increased to 10.44 trillion USD, around 7.0 trillion British pounds. The annual increasing rate is around 8.0%. So the next 5 years, which is the current 5 years from 2016 to 2020, China is finishing its 13th 5-year plan. It is aimed at developing multiple ways of booming innovative-oriented business. By 2019, which is last year, China's GDP has been increased to 14.14 trillion USD dollar, around 10.9 trillion British pounds. This marks an annual rate of increasing around 7.0%, 1% lower, but it's still very high, which is 7%. Okay, so let's look at the future. From 2021 to 2025, in those 5 years, China will be experiencing its 14th 5-year plan. It is predicated that in the next 5 years, the goal of innovation business becoming the main contributor for GDP, and this goal will be achieved by 2025. So therefore, in the next 5 years, China will continue to increase both its investments and encouragement on innovation policy. According to the recently released Double Circle strategy, China will focus on the big circle of domestic development and seeking for improvements on its ability of exporting of small, which is a small circle. So to achieve this, it will need more and more help from the UK and other countries to increase its ability of innovation for its domestic market increase. So we are looking forward for more cooperation and co-production between China and UK. So in the next stage, my colleague Lisa will lead you to the production path.
Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm the assistant producer at Story Future China. So before joining Story Future, I work as a documentary producer in the UK, Singapore, and China. So hopefully I can bring you some knowledge about the ways of working in China and also some production reality. So let's continue our journey. Okay, so now you have learned about establishing a business in China and learn about the Chinese audiences and the state policy. And so now let's explore the ways of working and also learn more about the Chinese cultural institutions. So here's a quick pause here. So what do you think is the most popular form of business ownership among Chinese museums? So there are 3 options here. So if you can choose the answers, that would be great. Thanks. Okay, so we have quite a lot answers, 3 of these options. So the quite a lot of people actually believe is PPP model, which is the private public relationship model. And okay, so the correct answer is actually the first one, option 1, state-owned institution, which is also called 事业 in Chinese. So the reason I put the Chinese words here is basically it's a very unique business model that follows a socialist economy, or you can call it planned economy economic model. So although since 1992, the Chinese landscape has seen a large amount of commercialization in different industries, but in most Chinese cultural institutions, such as TV stations and museums, they still stay in the same economic model as in before 1992. So it's under the engineer state model as well as the, you can call it a socialist economic model. But at the same time, there are quite a lot in production companies and the state-led capitalism. And so it's basically very different from the engineer state model led by the government, but with more creative freedoms within the commercialized model. So let's continue our journey. So now you understand the production, the business model in Chinese cultural institutions. So now, how can you kick off the production in the Chinese cultural sector? Are you going to apply for a bid from the Chinese government or from the museum or from the Chinese exhibition company, which under the 企业 model? So we have quite evenly options here. So quite a lot of people believe the first option. Okay. So in most cases, the answer is actually the option C, which is applying for a bid from a Chinese exhibition company. So as I mentioned, most of the Chinese museums are under the state socialist economic model, and most of them consider as government institution that normally not collaborate with foreign companies directly. So it is a leading Chinese exhibition company who are responsible to issue a bidding process and which the foreign companies can apply for. So let's continue our journey to look at this bidding process in more details. So this data was collected from my producing role in one casual production in China. So as we can see, the first stage is always the production or exhibition company who generate the ideas, prepare the exhibition brief, and submit to the government. And so after being approved, the company will start designing and finalizing the brief. And finally, they will send out the brief for bidding process, which is similar to the commissioning process in the UK to select a foreign design or production company as subcontractors. So let's continue our journey. To look at the main differences in working in the UK and China. So I'm sure many of you have experience in working with Chinese sectors, and it doesn't have to be in the cultural or museum sector. It could be in any ways of working in China. So yes, very obvious question answers. So the cultural differences, language, time frame, traditions, institutional differences, and different legal framework. And we got quite a lot interesting answer here. Yes, censorship, hierarchy, and different practices, and also the different expectation and the business models as we talked about earlier. Okay, thank you for your answers. So here's some different ways of working between the UK and China in terms of the production and communication decision making and the labor divisions. So in the UK, the production process in cultural sector is more systematic and organized. And on the other hand, in China, the production process is more network-based and always conducted in a less formal way. In terms of communications, in the UK, there are many regular, either weekly or monthly production meetings, but in China, there are less meetings, but more instant messaging and sometimes scheduled last-minute meetings according to different situations. And in terms of the decision-making process, the UK production always featured structured and phased process. While in China, again, it's more network connection-based, and there are shorter time frame, and the decision-making could be done spontaneously rather than in a phased process. And in the UK, the divisions of labors are very detailed, with each person contributing to their own specialties. While in the China, the division of labors is sometimes blurred. That could be one person responsible for different job roles. Okay, so let's take a look at the 3 stages of a typical cultural project in China. So the first stage is development, very similar to the research and development process in the UK. So firstly, initiate the ideas, concept for exhibitions, finalizing the exhibition brief, and launching the bidding process, as we talked about earlier in the case study, and finally commission the production and issuing the contract. So the next stage will be production, the actual production process. So including concept product design and the manufacture of the exhibition, as well as software or digital production of the immersive experience. And finally, they conduct the audience test before putting the exhibition into the actual museum. So normally the experience will be exhibited in the commissioning museum first as the initial or debut exhibition, and then some of the exhibition have the opportunity to be toured around China or internationally as a touring exhibition. Okay, so now hopefully you have learned quite a lot new insight about the Chinese market, and good luck with your coming production and your work in China. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Lisa and the research team. And thank you everyone out there for your involvement and answers. It's really great to get an idea of what people are thinking might be the responses and what is actually the case in China. But many of you, I can tell, have quite some experience in this area and provided some really interesting and helpful examples as well from your own experiences. It's been great. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, which is Dawn McCarthy-Simpson from PACT. She's the Business Development and Global Strategy Manager, and Dawn has such a wealth of experience to bring to this presentation. She has an MBE for her contribution to export in the UK, and has worked in the screen sector for many years. So I'll hand it over to you, Dawn, to share with us your experiences and the experience of your PACT members.
Thank you. And if I'd have known there was going to be such an amazing presentation with interactivity, I'd have asked if I could go first, because now I feel like I'm the poor relative who comes along and it's death by PowerPoint. But I'm sure I think I can share my screen. So I will click on that now. And as I say, I'm going to talk you through some of the key points from a TV point of view. So here we go. So cracking the China market. Well, I mean, I've been going to China for about 10 years and probably 2-3 times a year, traveled all around, maybe to about 13 of the key cities, introduced more than 250 UK TV production companies to China. And I've actually seen the TV export revenues go from 3 million to 40 million during that period. And I mean, the good news is we still keep increasing our export revenue to China. So that's good, despite all of the regulation issues that we currently face, which I will sort of go through. But as far as cracking China, I don't believe, regardless of how experienced somebody is within the Chinese market, that it is possible to really crack, just because it's this evolving, continuous changes within China. And very similar to the egg that you can see on the screen, this is kind of what China, the cracking of China is like. You sort of tap away at the top and try and delve down through the yolk and try and figure your way out. So what is the appeal in China, particularly from a TV point of view, but that, you know, across all sectors really. And it has to be the sheer scale. And when you think about in the audience, you know, 1.3 billion people that live in China. So potentially, you know, that's your potential audience, which is 1.3, which is unbelievable figures. And then you start to think about the scale and opportunity. So who are the buyers? What, you know, who's out there? And then, you know, when you think about the UK, you start thinking about half a dozen TV channels. But when you look at China, you've got over 2,500 TV and radio channels, and that includes all the provincial as well as the network. And then and I know I'm throwing lots of figures at you, but it just gives you a scale of what the media, the media landscape is. So you've got 17 million total hours of broadcast. So that's a lot of eyeballs watching at any time. And 4,900 imported programs, which equates to 107,000. So you can see just by the sheer numbers that there's opportunity. And this is what's driving a lot of our industry, the TV industry, to look at this as a potential. So it's big, it's bold, they have large audiences, but because of the sheer amount of broadcasters out there, it's really highly competitive. And I think that's, for us, it's an advantage, because when they're highly competitive, the UK is known as one of the best producers globally. So it gives us that edge when we're moving into this highly competitive side. So again, thinking about figures and numbers, I've just put an example here, just again, so you can get the scale of the potential for TV. Tencent, largest online platform, owners of, we talked about WeChat, have been on WeChat what seems like forever. So, a key player in the market. So when they, across the 60 TV series that they showed, they had more than 100 million plays. So you can see it's big numbers. And just on that, I've just put a quick tip in there is, and I always say this to our members, is don't go in and pitch numbers. So in the UK, we think 5 million is a great audience. So we go, oh, you got 5 million. The problem is, if you say 5 million to the Chinese, it feels like it's a really small number. Whereas if you say it got 10% audience share, 20% audience share, or even in that slot hour, what that, above average slot rating is. So maybe just use different figures, I think is a really good tip, and not necessarily use our figures, because they're quite, on comparison, we're very, very small. So where's the money in China? And this is something people are always, who should I go to? Where is the money? How do I get some investment? Who do I go to pitch to? So there's lots of questions, but obviously it's all about money. We only really want to, we don't want to trade with China because we want to trade with China. We want to trade with China because we see potentially there's a lot of money there. So unlike the UK, where most of the commissioning comes from the broadcasters in-house. So you would, go along to a broadcaster, you would pitch your idea, and then they would fund or part fund that project. The advertisers and brand in China is much more influential. There's a lot of funding that comes from these particular areas. So if you're non-TV, if you're in immersive tech or other areas, you're still going to find that a lot of the funding comes from branded content. So the big challenge is how do you take something that is editorially interesting as a TV content or any content versus the commerciality of this, the interest that a brand might be attracted to that. And then you've got the issues of then navigating those two things around the cultural sensitivities and the regulation that currently exists there. And then another interesting area that I would say probably quite a large number of our members go, and that's through, they're kind of a producer/agency. And what they have access to is they can navigate everything for you. So they can go and they can attract government funding. They can speak to advertising directly, and they've got good access and network with the broadcasters. And they can also act as a support. So they can fill in all the forms you need. They can find the talent. They can source all the services for that production. So that's quite a common route through there. And then you've got investors. And often these investors are non-TV related investors. So that's quite an interesting one. And what we have found is a lot of the investors that have invested in TV content have come from property. And I'm sure there's a reason why. I don't know whether that's if they create something and it's a really feel good, it promotes China to a global audience, that looks favorable towards the government, and that helps them get permissions for building or whatever that might be. And that's just me guessing. I'm not saying that's true, but I'm sure there's something in it for them, as I can't imagine that they'd want to hand over millions and millions of pounds to make a really beautiful program about China, and they don't benefit from that. So thinking about trade barriers, because they're there. We all know that they're there. And I think one of the biggest trade barriers that we face in the TV side is is really the Chinese government's perception of what TV content does. And I think because it lives in everyone's lives, we view for multiple hours per day. And we saw in that last one about people's, you know, they'll go to a museum because they've been influenced by a TV program. And TV influences a lot of things. It influences views on certain situations, but it also exposes people to find out and explore about different cultures and countries. So because we have that very strong lead, it also concerns the Chinese government, because they say that all this commercialization has led to a decline in cultural quality. So they feel that, you know, it's not always the right thing. So media is constantly under a spotlight. And unfortunately, the reaction to the perception which regulators have is that they then trigger a whole range of, in some cases, radical changes in TV regulation, which has just built up more and more barriers for the UK. So what are the regulations and censorship that we face? Well, there has been a change in the last few years. So previously, it was a department within the Chinese government, it's called SAFT, which closed down in March 2018. So previously, all the creative industries in TV, games, film, etc., were all bunched together and regulated from this department. What happened in 2018 is that was split, and TV and radio was taken out of the wider group, and now it's controlled directly by the central government. So what that means is it's even more contained, it's more heavily regulated. And unlike Ofcom, where our regulator, they will go out to consultation, there'll be reviews, there's nothing they do immediately without either an investigation, if it's something that the broadcaster may have breached, or if it's something that they need to change policy-wise, there's always a wider consultation. The regulator in China can just instantly shut things down. We've seen things disappear off TV schedules instantly with no reason why. And that obviously that puts UK companies, it makes them feel very wary about entering a market where it can react like that, where there isn't as that safety net. And I've known content that have gone quite far down, has been on the schedule, ready to go live, it's been produced, and then it's just pulled, and they're given no explanation. So as regulation gets tighter, it becomes harder. And an example that I put in there, which is the format restrictions, which was brought in quite a few years ago now. And that was where Chinese companies, broadcasters, could only license 2 formats. So formats as in Gogglebox, X Factor, so those type of series formats, entertainment formats. And there was only allowed to license 2 per year. But obviously 2 per year, when you look at the previous pages with thousands of hours of content and scheduling that they have to fill, was obviously a big issue. So what we found is during a period of a couple of years that we were seeing more and more IP infringements coming through. So a lot of our members that were having their formats either just being straight copied, or that they were saying that they wasn't going to pay the license anymore because they've made lots of changes. So suddenly it's not their program anymore. So that was obviously a big issue. And whereas formats used to be our bread and butter, I think what we're seeing is the entertainment side is actually more difficult and complex. And I'll show you some examples of what is working really, really well for some of our members. So again, on the lines of regulation and censorship, it's difficult to really navigate. And I think there has been some reference in the early presentation about, finding partners, finding that right, on the ground help and support. And I think that's even more so with China, because when you look at Article 5 of the rules and you identify which the content that is not allowed in TV series, it can be really broad. And we identified about 43 different items with broad meanings. So when you look at political sensitivity, it's like, well, what does that mean? So it's very kind of woolly and it's very subjective as to what people might mean as political sensitivity. Equally, social problems. Well, social problems because what we see as social problems in the UK are maybe very different to social problems in China. So there's lots of different things in there. I mean, we even saw that celebrities wearing earrings was another ban. So they're bringing these bans really, really quickly. So that's all the things that we're faced with. But yet, you know, we see year on year, revenue, export revenue is growing. So people are still working in China from the UK. There's still opportunities. I think we've still only cracked the surface of what our potential is in China. So what are the safer routes? So thinking from a producer's point of view, if you was to go into China, clearly you'd avoid all the really sensitive areas. You know, you're not going to get into creating something about politics. History can be a little bit of a fine line, but if you crack that, it's a great way to get into China. So what I've done is I've just come up with a couple of things just as an example to show you what has worked and then the different routes of how they've gone through for the funding. So this one, the Empires of Silver. So this was produced by a Scottish company, Matchlight, and interestingly, this was from an investment point of view. So none of the money came from the broadcaster, it came purely from an investor on the back of this really high-end 4K 3-part series was shot, it was sold globally. Again, it's a really good feel good. It shows about the power and the precious metals that come from China. So again, it's on message. It says the right things. So, but it didn't come from financial money, and so the Chinese broadcasters wasn't really involved in this process. And then you've got another recent one, which is China's Greatest Treasures. So again, this is another production company based in Bristol. And this was a co-production, so BBC World News and CCTV. But the big selling point on here was that it came from, you know, it was a program that could go and it could go global. So again, it was all about a feel good. It's about Alistair Suk, art critic, who travels China and explores all the wonderful treasures across there. And again, Secrets of Forbidden City, Line TV. Again, a really good historical side. But the key selling point for this is it was a co-production between Channel 4, Nova, Arte, CICC. So, and they went through the producer agency route, who then pieced together all the China money for this. So ticked lots of boxes. It was a great story, which is what China wants. It wants to tell great stories about China to the world. So that ticked lots of boxes on there. Another key thing that they're really interested in is not just talking about their big cities and, you know, it's all about power and domination, but they also, and this is a really good example of here, which was shot in Shenyang, I think it's pronunciation, which is a small rural town in China. And it was following the lives of school children and teachers, but it was a really human story. It's about their dreams, aspirations, the community. So I think equally that's something is, you know, that they're interested in, again, telling the story to the world. So it gave them global exposure from this, but not just promoting big city China, but also the smaller towns across China. And it goes without saying, because we've talked about tech, you know, tech is so important to them, and because they feel at the, you know, the lead inside of the tech, and they want to tell the stories about how they've innovated, how they, you know, what they've created. And so it's really important to be able to tell that you know, that story globally. And again, another example, so Discovery Atlas, this was a series on discovery. and they ran some sessions that talked about China and revealed. So again, it's all about telling the Chinese story to the rest of the world. And of course, natural history. So natural history works everywhere in the world. You know, it sells. And from a China point of view, it's a way to show the amazing, you know, landscapes across China, but also, you know, the cultural side of it and the exotic side. So natural history goes well all the time. So opportunities for the UK. So one of the big things that has changed is, you know, finally we had a co-production treaty that was ratified in March 2018. It was the second co-production treaty in TV to be signed. The first was New Zealand. And for those of you who don't quite understand how the co-production in China works, just give you a basics of it. Financial contribution, it's not a 50-50 split, it's a 20-80, and it can be under exceptional circumstances, can be a low limit of 10%. So that could be a 10% contribution from a UK point of view, 90 from China. But you can also bring in third parties. So you could bring in an American network as an example to piece that. And then there's lots of cultural qualifications, talent, crew that you need to justify on there. But there's other ways that you can create opportunity. So you've got the upskilling. So this is if you're an expert in an area and you can go in and you can help with, you know, creating ideas or anything along there as an expert advice. And for them, it's great because it's all about upskilling. Co-creation, so this is jointly developing and owning IP, and I'm going to link those two up in the last page on here. And then investment, so investment from China. So one thing that the Chinese were doing several years ago, there was a little bit of a clamp on how much they could invest, but they were buying and investing into UK companies in order to increase their global profile. So that was quite a big one. And acquisitions, which are still quite active, you know, they're still buying lots of content for multiple platforms. So final page, really just to say about, you know, it's all about protection. And I think we hit up on that in the previous presentation. You know, it's so key because the whole of the creative industry is creative and IP and ideas led. So it's very important to protect those ideas. And just remember that Chinese law is the only law recognized in China. So any agreements you're getting anyone to sign must be in Chinese law and in dual language. So the UK China Film and TV Toolkit was put together several years ago in order to give people some template contracts that you can actually use. And you can just, you know, it's quite easy to see where you need to fill in the context in there. So the non-disclosure, which is quite simple, it's just you're sharing an idea, you want to protect them from stealing that idea. So NDAs, quite a, you know, it's something we've used for years anyway in the industry, but this just means it's a Chinese legal agreement. And then the co-creation agreement. So the co-creation agreement was something that I created years ago on the back of the fact that on the consultancy side, because lots of our members were going out to China as experts and helping develop lots of ideas and almost giving away their IP basically, because sometimes those ideas would be purely theirs and then they'd end up in this mega hit that, you know, that got sold in various different countries that made lots of money, but you were just left with a consultancy fee. So I started to think, well, it didn't feel really fair. So we threw this as a concept when we were developing the toolkit as a way that we could, and this could be for any industry. And the basic principle is you have the UK company or expert, you have the China company expert, you all get into a room, you sign the contract, you brainstorm lots of ideas, you write up what proposals you're going to take forward, and then if any party then, you know, gets that, whether it's a commission or whether they end up being created over a period of time, could be 5 years, you set the limit, then you both jointly own the IP. And I thought that was a much fairer way of sharing your, you know, because people will sit back and you can throw lots of ideas at people, but unless you protect yourself, they're going to run with those ideas. So this is a way of protecting those. And finally, the co-development agreement. So that's basically something that you would use typically if you were doing a co-production and you'd already developed most of the idea. It was pretty much there, but you needed help completing and making it more relevant for that country. So you'd probably use more of a CDA. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I know we're going to go to a wider chat. I just made a couple of things just to summarize and to give you some final tips. So it's more about, think about ideas that you pitch. So think about regulation. So regardless of how great the idea is, think, is it fit for purpose for China? Because you could spend a lot of time, a lot of money trying to get around regulation. So make it easy for yourself. Consider the investment routes. So you understand a little bit more about where the investment comes from. So think about where you want to pitch this to. Can you come to the table already with global partners? So have you already got a broadcaster attached that will open a lot more doors if you say, I've got BBC interested in this as well? That's much better. And then, if you're going to commit to China, you're in it for the long haul. It's not a dip in the toe experience. It's something that you have to commit to a long time. It has to be part of your wider strategy. And finally, I'd say, in capital letters, protect your IP. And these forms are available widely, so you can use these quite freely and use them as a template. But then you can develop your own. But these are a good start. So thank you. That's me, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Dawn. That was really interesting. And I might start with, well, I'd like to get all our panelists, our presenters up on the screen if we can. And I'd like to introduce an additional panel member for the Q&A session, which is Tony Humphries. Tony Humphries is a screen specialist and works both in the independent film and television sector and has incredible personal experience in that area over many years, and now also consults to Department for International Trade for China and the US markets. And he's here today to help answer questions as well. So thank you for joining us as well, Tony. Can I get you to say hello, Tony, just so everyone can see your face on screen and meet you? You can do a short introduction if I've missed anything there.
Great, somebody's unmuted me now. Yeah, so my background is TV and film production. Can I just say before I go on, I thought the university presentation, the research was fantastic, as Dawn said, very thorough, a lot of information in there. And I can see why Dawn was saying, not covering some of the same ground. I will try not to go over all of that wonderful content, but make it more personal in terms of personal experiences, some of the things that haven't maybe come out on the data and the research side of things, that experiences that happen. Dawn mentioned about going to China for the last 10 years. I went out with as a producer, as a member of PACT. I think it was in about 2014, when I think one of the Chinese companies out there invited and paid for 20 UK producers to go over there and be involved. I can see Dawn smiling. That was a very interesting experience for all of us there. But just a couple of observations which tie back into an attitude, really. We all went over and we all had something to sell. A lot of people see China, or they did in those days, probably slightly less now, but it's still a huge market. So a lot of people still see China, but more so then as dollar signs, pound note signs, yuan signs. And the Chinese in the early days, even pre-14, were sometimes spending money in the wrong ways, spending more money than they needed to acquire content, to acquire knowledge and experience, basically. So a lot of people were going there with misconception, and there's still a lot of misconception today for people who haven't been to China. But just going back to that particular event, we went over there, and it was a 3-day event. I'll give a couple of anecdotes that will sum up. So a week before we were going, a Chinese lady that I knew and I was working with on developing some educational training, TV production training, was one of the Chinese delegates on an event, and she phoned me and she said, "You know this event in Beijing?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, it's moved." And I said, "What do you mean it's moved?" She said, "It's gone to another city, which is a 2.5-hour flight away." And so I phoned Dawn and I said, "Have you heard anything from the other side? They'd moved it." And Dawn said, "No." I said, "No, I think they're going to, yeah." And we got an email, and the 20 of us producers and the members of PACT and, sort of entourage that were there were all told, "No, it has been moved to the city of Xiamen, but don't worry, we'll organize all the flights for you." And what your researchers were saying about last minute, people had booked their flights. We were all coming in on different days. And the last minute, but that was totally acceptable and totally normal. And there was a commercial and political reason for moving it to this other city. And we went into this very nice hotel and everything there. But that was the last minute changes which happen, and everything can change. So there are lots of different cultural aspects of what can be changed. And if you go with preconceptions and apply a Western contractual and a Western approach to things, you will be surprised. It will all be going swimmingly, and then suddenly something will come completely out of left field, and you'll be completely surprised by it. I went back after that. I was there. Oh, the other thing on that event I was going to mention as typical was that we were there for 3 days, and there were 20 of us as producers, and each of us had a presentation. It was a big hall. Typically, events in China are huge events with big halls, hundreds of people in them with tables, all the VIPs at the front. We all went up on the stage and gave a 20-minute presentation about what we were, who we were, what we had to sell. And we had tables outside for one-to-one meetings. About 2.5 days into this, one of our other producers said to me, "Have you noticed something?" I said, "No, what?" He said, "We've shown all of our content and we're pitching all of our stuff. And in all of the panels that we've had with top people from all the broadcasters, we haven't seen 1 second of footage shown back to us about what's going on in China." That's quite typical, and there's in some ways that reflects a little bit of a nervousness in the international market. It did more then than it does now. But the other thing that it reflected was something that's not been mentioned today, which is China's One Belt, One Road policy. And the One Belt, One Road policy, for those who may have heard it, it's been on the news. It's been used across economic platforms, cultural platforms. But this is all about, it's about China wanting to communicate and reach out internationally to the world and be that global player, that international country that we were hearing about in terms of creativity going outwards. And that, from the cultural point of view, has and the creative industry's point of view, has an impact. Dawn touched on it about the IP. And right at the very beginning of the presentation, your researchers were talking about protecting IP. Because there's no two ways around it. Historically, China had a reputation for stealing IP, for using other people's IP. Now, from our point of view, that's horrific. But actually, in China, it's more culturally acceptable. So going back to the cultural differences are now being merged into international shared knowledge both ways, where the Chinese traditional systems would say, we understand more about that and the importance of that from the West. And what's important is we also understand that if we want to bring our content and our information to the outside world, they're going to have to be a shared set of rules. So that moves fairly quickly, and since 2014. And one of the other connections to that is how quickly it was alluded to in both Dawn's and the other presentation, how quickly China moves. In those 6 years, it's the change has been incredible. And I think somebody told me recently, that in China they can put up a 30-story apartment block in 3 months. And that is something that you realize the speed, the labor that they've got, the number of people they can put at stuff, but also there's an incredible work ethic in China. People, after that trip that we went to, I then went as one of those consultants that Dawn was talking about to help Hunan TV and Hunan TV, along with Shanghai Media Group.
Sorry to cut across you, Tony. I'm just conscious we've got limited time left and we've got a number of questions from the floor. So perhaps we could just go to a few of those and draw in your insights as we go along. I've already learned quite a lot about them from your perspective there. So we've got a couple of questions coming in. And actually, I wonder if we could go to one of those areas that you've been touching on, Tony, but just come back to Dawn and bring you in, Tony. We've got a question from Teresa about what stage do you formalise the co-development agreement, and what kind of approach to an option with a broadcaster first. So maybe Dawn, I could bring you back in and then come back to you, Tony.
Yeah, hi Teresa. So I would say you need to just get into agreements very, very early stages. So, it just means that you're protecting everything that you get into conversation with. So so my advice would just be as soon as you possibly can. And what was the second part about the broadcaster side?
I think it's a question of, like, if you're looking to an option to a broadcaster, when in that process might you do it? Would you go, if you're coming from the UK, would you go having already optioned to a UK broadcaster, or would you recommend that they go, kind of like with the idea and develop it with a Chinese partner?
You have more chance if you've got another broadcaster attached, because most of what the broadcasters want in China is not just necessarily domestic programming. What they're looking for is programming that can travel outside of China, so that it becomes more global. So if you've got a broadcaster attached from anywhere in the world, ideally they love UK broadcasters or American, then that always opens a lot more doors. But that's not stopping you from going direct, because they will look at ideas directly as well, but you've just got more chance on the other way.
I'm going to be a party pooper here. The contract is only a starting point in China. If you have a contract, I've got so many examples of having a signed contract and then within minutes, there's a request to change it. And again, this is a cultural difference. It's changing, but once you have a contract, don't assume that is then in stone. It's probably not, is the short answer on that one. Also speed, the speed with which things happen. Even if you've got a contract and you've agreed something, if you're looking at what that balance might be between the two partners, China moves extremely quickly, as we heard earlier. And that means that if they like something and they say, okay, well, what have you got? And let's look at it. If they need you to come to the table with a certain element of, resource on that, and you can't deliver that, don't be surprised that if in 3 months they've moved on. With the right partner, they will hang around and they'll work and they'll develop. But in most cases, if you can't deliver what they need, they're very, very aggressive economically. Somebody mentioned profit in one of the earlier, I don't know if it was Dawn or one of the earlier presentations about being profit driven. Do not underestimate how economically and commercially motivated the Chinese organizations are.
I mean, that's really good and really clear. There was another.
Sorry, James. One other point that's directly relevant to that, but going back to Teresa's question, and again, just party pooping again, is Chinese are very, very label conscious. So you may not necessarily be. You could pitch the most wonderful idea in the world. If you can't couch that in some kind of credentials, which Dawn touched on in her presentation, then you won't get very far. So when you're looking to pitch something, even when before you get to the contract stage, you've got to identify to the buyer in China or to the potential partner, as Dawn said about your track record, or I think Mariana may have said about delivering your credentials. That's almost more important than the content and what you're trying to sell.
Thanks, Tony. That's great. That's really, really helpful in terms of companies thinking about how they sell themselves and their background. We had a question earlier on about audiences and audience testing that I wanted to bring Lulu and Mariana in about how the question was about how audience testing can and is done in China and to what extent it happens. Lulu and Mariana, Lulu first and then Mariana, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah. As I said, they barely do user research, like specific and systemic user research. They do kind of test, but we couldn't call it user test because for exhibition companies, they usually, if they create an exhibition, immersive exhibitions, they usually test the whole system, especially the interaction part themselves, because they always consider whether the design is good or not based on their expertise, their skills, and their experience. Because when they do that, because first of all, the museum, if they're working with the museum doesn't request them to do user tests, so they don't do it. And also because the limited in the budget and the time, so there's a very short time and budget to do a proper user test. And they don't want to make the project going more complicated, so they try to make the thing simple. So they just do a very quick and short test and to see if the interactive sections going smooth and if there are any bugs there. So that's it. And for other kind of user tests, if they do like governmental projects, they have a very specific showroom. So it's like the showroom is exactly same as the pavilions they are going to deliver. So they have every details and every prototypes there, and ask the governmental leaders or officials to the showroom and ask them to try different sections of the exhibitions and give the feedback. So basically like that. And for the audience part, most companies, they observe users' behavior, audiences' behavior on site. But on site, that means after they launch the exhibitions in the museum or in an venue. So they observe their behaviors and to see if there anything can be modified, and then they would modify it maybe in the second round of the exhibition or in the future exhibition. That's it.
So yeah, that's really interesting, Lulu. Your research has found there's very limited user testing before a product goes live. Then it's a kind of like live bit of testing and a key bit of getting government stakeholders to test or experience some of these things. Mariana, you had some experience and different experiences as well you wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you. The UK companies that go to China do slightly more user testing, just to kind of understand if the translation works well, which is often not the case, because it's not just a matter of translating from one language to another. There are also kind of different cultural practices. So basically, some things when translated can be incomprehensible, even if the words are right. And also it's quite difficult to judge the quality of performance because the performance style is quite different. So the theater companies that we were talking to did quite a lot of like testing to understand if like actors that were there are actually good. And as Lulu mentioned, there are kind of like two sides of testing. So one is like whether users will like it and understand it, and also whether the the government like censorship will allow things to happen. And for the kind of like commissions that approve experiences to be launched, there's like a separate testing, but also at a late stage of the prototype. Basically like it seems that there's a lot of things that cannot kind of be shifted, but actually it's a bit more of a negotiation. So for example, like we were talking to Punch Drunk, who basically brought a version of Macbeth to China, and like Macbeth without sorcery is kind of like strange to understand. And so basically they managed to kind of negotiate things and to adapt things in a way that was still allowed. So it's not kind of set in stone things as well.
Thanks, Mariana. I think we've got just one last question that I think maybe Tony and Dawn may have experience of. I'm not sure if this is if anybody is open to anybody, but essentially the question about whether there's any experience about residency models where artists or producers spend time in China working within the culture or an organization to produce new work. Can anybody speak to that? Have anybody come across that?
One of my Chinese colleagues who ran her own production company used to do stuff like that, but on a commercial basis. So she'd find the artist that she wanted, and she'd bring them in and use their, buy them for a month or 2 months or for whatever period. So, you can't go to China and not really be resident. When you go there, there's a period of time where you can do that. And sorry, James, just one point, if I could just answer Mariana's point, because the really important thing is about language that she touched on. When I was working with Hunan TV, my partner couldn't do the whole period I was there, so they found me a translator. You have to train the translator in the language that you're working in. So if you're working in the museum sector with experienced economy, and the rides and events or whatever it is, you have to train the translator to understand the business of the language of your business. Because if you go to China, and Dawn mentioned a few times formats, if you use the word format outside of TV, nobody has the first idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's really great, Tony. That kind of specialized language is really important. Does anybody else want to come in on that question about residencies, if they've had any experience?
One more point on the residency, and again, this is a general point. Having been out there as a sort of experienced consultant working with a broadcaster, which was a very successful show that I worked on. We got 62.5 million viewers per week average audience. There is a tendency that, going back to this one belt, one road of sort of absorbing information, that if you go out there as a consultant and you're giving something to them, it can be seen by the company you're working with that once they've worked with you, they've taken everything they need from you. So you don't necessarily build up long-term relationships with single companies. It's more likely that one company that you've worked with will be the credentials for you to work once with a lot more. So be prepared to give when they take what you've got to give. They quite often assume that that's everything, and they've learnt what they need in the knowledge acquisition stakes.
Thank you, Tony. That's really, really helpful. And I guess I'm conscious of time. I know that you very kindly and others have agreed to stay on, but I know a lot of participants will need to go on. So I think Kylie's going to continue some of the conversation, as I'm one of those people who needs to move on. But I think what I'd end with is just by thanking you all from my own personal point of view about how brilliant the research has been, and Tony and Dawn, the kind of insight that you've added to it, but also just picking up on your last point and the point that's come across really clearly is how important a framework for companies to kind of be part of as a long-term relationship. And to come back to how I opened the session is, Story Futures China is part of an Arts and Humanities Research Council and government investment in providing that kind of framework that gives hopefully companies some security and relationships around, what is a tricky market to navigate and enter. So we'll be either in December or January launching a call for a competition to create immersive experiences between the two countries, and knowing that companies, I hope we'll hear from you at that point, knowing that there is a roadmap that we're trying to provide and a framework for you to work into. So thank you all for joining. Please do stay on the line. Kylie, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks. And thank you everyone for joining us. One question which came through, which was important about resources. So just to reconfirm, because yes, there's been a wealth of information provided today, that we will follow up with some handouts, and Dawn has kindly agreed to share with you the toolkit for participants in this event, which is really fantastic and helpful. And there is a couple of questions that I will just take very quickly at the end. One is, and maybe Dawn might be helpful to answer this, is there any network opportunities for UK producers? And how do we establish network opportunities? I think regarding Story Futures, it's something that we should consider. Our networking and our connection has been specifically around this opportunity with the National Gallery and the Science Museum, but more broadly, we would like to build off that experience and create other partnerships and other networking opportunities. But Dawn, do you have anything to add on networking opportunities?
I mean, there's always loads of opportunities. So I think, we used to run a really successful China exchange but obviously we're in lockdown at the moment, so those plans have been scuppered to try and get that more, people working together. So there's, if anyone can register for our newsletter, so you don't have to be a PACT member, and any opportunities or access or ways of being able to connect with various different, not just in China but everywhere else in the world. So I just recommend do that, because we do so much activity. It's very hard to just pinpoint one particular thing, and we tend to look at country focus as well. So like next week we're doing something with the Mexican, Brazilian broadcasters. A couple of weeks ago we did it with all the American broadcasters. So there's always something happening. So you just need to register for the newsletter and look out for anything China specific.
Can I just add to that, Kylie, that within Department for International Trade, I know my background's film and TV here, but the event that you're looking at is more of an interactive one. We do have colleagues that I'm sure you already know in those fields. There are people working in Department for International Trade in what would be the experienced economy, which is probably where this fits in some ways. So there are DIT people in specialist roles that cross interactivity, content, experienced economy. So I can give you links to those people that would be helpful for people specifically working in the museum sector going forward.
That's fantastic, Tony. And our team will laugh, because I'm going to introduce my favorite topic, which is food. And one of the disappointing and challenging things with networking, and this is a lunch event, we hope you've all been having your lunch while you've been listening along, but one of the interesting and challenging areas for us in this idea about networking is nothing beats face-to-face conversation, particularly when you're crossing international borders. And a lot of business is done in China over dinner and after the event. It's the same here, and we're struggling to overcome that challenge in the current world environment. But the most important thing is intention, and we've had fantastic intention and engagement from our Chinese partners so far, even without the ability to meet them face to face. And there was just one more question, which Andy asked, because I do need to wrap it up at 2:15 and let everyone get on to their business. But it was about whether advanced technologies are used in evaluating audience experiences, eye tracking and geospatial technologies. Is there anything in that regard? Have you come across anything, Mariana or Lulu, in your research?
Yes. When I talked to a professor in the Ningbo Nottingham University in China, and he did a lot of very in-depth user research for academic purpose only. So what he even used brain scanner to detect the brain wave from users to see, okay, how the enjoyment level of audiences. But if you do it with the A party, such as an institution like a museum or a governmental institution, you have to think about how could you convince them to accept the user research to be done, because as I said, they don't have time or budget for it. And how could you balance the work? And because in their work list, the priority works always be the production, the content, and even the financial plan. But the user research usually is not a decisive work. So how could you convince them, and how could you make them to accept the result from the collect from the audiences? So it's like that. But I don't think technology used is quite sensitive, because for young people, they quite accept that they are born and living in the digital world.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you, Lulu. And that reflects where Story Futures model comes from, because we are connecting with academics and the commercial sector to enable these opportunities that don't often happen, particularly in the Chinese market.
They do also tend to use a lot of AI in their, the whole country with massive numbers of people is hugely connected. So all of that data tends to be their first port of call. And I'm not sure about museums, but certainly in TV, the response to social media the morning after a show is really huge quite often, and really taken in as part of their knowledge.
So I was just going to add on the AI side. So I've seen a few developments that that have been introduced into the market, which is tracking audience attentiveness, and that's been able to track, you know, how attentive they are to a program, where their eyes are moving. So all of that, and there's a couple of different companies that are quite far advanced on that. But that, I think that's where the future is going to be, because, you know, advertisers will want to know if people are actually engaged in a program fully, or whether they're just viewing it as a second screen, or if they're not attentive as anything else. So there's a lot of tech that's coming down the line, particularly on that side. And I think with the, you know, when people are all data driven, I think that's going to be a really good sell for TV/advertising.
Great. That's so helpful. I think we could chat on this all day. It's a big market with big challenges and big opportunities. But we're here with the support of PACT and Department for Trade to support you on your journey, particularly in the immersive technology space, and particularly in the museum and cultural sector, in particular for our opportunity coming up, but for other opportunities in the immersive storytelling space as well. So thank you everybody for joining today. We will have a future third event coming up around the announcement of our funding in January, and that the information will be on our website. There's also some information, so to just close the event, I'll get you to put up the final slide for me there, which highlights some other interesting opportunities Story Futures have to offer. We are looking for companies who are keen to have mentor, the opportunity is there with our speed networking for immersive production companies who would like a placement with a talented creative in immersive production in their company. So there's lots more details of everything we've got going on the website. So thank you, everyone. I will close. Thank you so much to our presenters. A great journey. I hope you're closer to the confident side than you are the less confident side. And thank you to PACT and Department for Trade for joining us as well. I think we'll close there. Thanks, everyone. Thank you from Berlin. It's great to have someone joining from Berlin. Amazing. And we'll close the webinar there.
Thank you.
Thank you.